My favorite kind.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I got my co-host Christian Gray over here, and I want to take a moment to introduce the incredible Michael Eric Scarritt. Tonight we stand at the edge of science and story with a guide who has carved paths through rock and reason alike. Michael Eric Scarritt is not just an entrepreneur, he's an architect of possibility, a builder of the fault lines where commerce, culture, and consciousness collide. As co-founder of the Entheogenic Medical Research Centre, he's pushing psychedelic medicine out of the shadows and into the light of responsible science and policy reform. His fingerprints are on award-winning films, multi-million-dollar infrastructure, and the molecular blueprints of cannabis and psilocybin. From the synthesis of rare cannabinoids to the extraction of sacred fungi, Sean's work is not extraction alone, but translation, turning the language of molecules into grammar of healing, weaving ethical development with sustainable impact across continents from North America to Colombia to South Africa. But behind the lab coat and the podium, you'll find a climber gripping stone and sky, a seeker wandering the boundless landscapes of science fiction, mapping futures that may already be arriving. So tonight, we don't just welcome a researcher, we welcome a visionary spelunker of the mind, a bridge builder between science and myth, a man who sees in molecules the architecture of tomorrow. Welcome to the show, Michael Eric Scarritt. How's everybody doing today out there?
Whoop, whoop. Woo! George, I can say I feel fantastic after that introduction. I think you're the only one that should ever introduce me going forward. We need to make this an exclusive situation where every single public speaking opportunity, I'm like, I'd like to beam in my good friend George to tell you all a little bit about me. Flattery will get you everywhere, my friend. Thank you for that eloquent introduction. I feel like I really want to get to know the guy you're talking about.
So I think George should be recording those and licensing them back to the guests and speakers. And then they can use them on other shows and live talks and just hit play. Just hit play. It's really simple. Royalty stream, Patreon.
Yeah, I think that's who. Look, I've been looking at the things you've been doing, and I'm in awe of it. I'm super thankful because I think we need it more than ever right now. And I'm so grateful you're here, and I'm so grateful to Christian Gray is here, co-hosting the show with me today. And let's jump into this, guys. Where do you guys want to start at? Christian, why don't you start us off, man? What's on your mind?
Well, the origin story of getting to meet Sean, I think the first time was the Magic and Mirth thing in El Segundo. Was that around the holidays?
Yeah.
And that was co-hosted with Jacob Tell from District 216, George knows Jacob. And I think I just want to underscore the value of human connection and meeting in person. I love webinars and podcasts and virtual and Slack and I hate Slack actually, but Signal and all the things are great. But when you meet someone in person, your body is taking in so much information and you're processing so much about them. It's not just what they say. It's not just how they look. It's like their body language, right? And their sincerity. And I just picked up such a really positive vibe with Sean. I had no idea who he was. I didn't know how he got there. I didn't know if I'd ever see the guy again. And then the conversation started, and then they continued, and then I learned about what he's trying to do in South Africa, and I hear about his relationship with the Shulgins, and I'm like, oh, I need to keep track of this one. So that was the start, and I think it's been pretty awesome ever since.
Sean, what comes to mind for you, man? What's on your radar right here? What are you thinking?
I was doing podcasts last year. I think I interviewed every Monday for like 63 weeks in a row. I got to talk to like various different people. That's actually how I met Jacob. So that's how I met Christian. And it's really just such an honor and a privilege to be able to sit and pontificate with like-minded friends inside of this wonderful ecosystem to try to expand our echo chamber or expand our reach, because I think that psychedelic gatherings are very, very important. And I want to make sure that the community starts to focus its attention on something a little bit less myopic, a little bit outside of its current scope. So that's what I'm really grateful for, is having George having some impact with you, that, you know, allowing you to work your magic to get this out, and your excitement and your passion. It's infectious. So I often find out what I think when it exits my mouth.
Yeah.
So it's really important to have these spaces for discovery, for communication, and for building community. Even, you know, like you said, in person's great, but if we can start these conversations online and get a broad impact, then we get to meet so many fun, new, cool people. So that's what I'm excited about for today. It's just kind of to sit here and talk and, you know, figure out what you guys are interested in, and how we can work together to create a future that includes everyone in the psychedelic landscape and allows for a expanded vision of what is possible.
Yeah. It's exciting times. I know, Christian, you and I were talking a little bit before, and you had some kind of questions teed up a little bit. I figured I'd let you start off the show and get them in there.
You have so many good questions all the time. I'll take a whack.
Yeah, let's see what you got.
Sean, you know, I think a lot of people might meet you and hear about your chemist, you know, chops and the people you run with and your understanding of plant medicine and cannabis, but you know, you're not just some white boy hanging out in Oakland. So can you talk a little bit about where you grew up and what it was like being in the Middle East? Because I think that has a lot of framing to your story and your narrative.
Yeah, thanks for that, Christian. So to give a little context, first of all, I'd like to say I consider myself chemist adjacent. I like to be in the room with really, really smart people. And I grew up on a really, really, really small compound called Dhahran Aramco in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And I was immersed in engineering and scientific thinking. Everyone I knew, both of their parents went to college. Everyone I knew, 80% of them, parents were engineers or doctors or scientists. So I was really blessed, not just for the multicultural phenomenon of being, you know, best friends with South Africans and Palestinians, as well as Americans and you know, a host of different cultural legacies. I was also, like I said, immersed in this sort of very systems thinking methodology. So even though I, you know, have a communications degree, I worked in film for 20 years. I don't have very much formal training in the sciences. I found it to be the all-consuming love of my life to be around people who are brilliant psychedelic chemists. So I'll go back to your question a little bit and talk more about Saudi Arabia.
What years were you there as a child or a kid?
So great question. I'll go back a touch. So my parents lived in the Middle East for around 27 years. They lived in Iran before the fall of the Shah, and I was conceived in Tehran. My mother was 8.5 months pregnant when they flew on the last military transport out of Iran and back to America. So I was born in Melbourne, Florida, and then when I was around 3.5 months old, my parents moved to Libya. My dad did a transition then. He worked in aerospace first for NASA and JPL, and then Hughes. That's what he was working for, Hughes in Libya. I'm sorry, in Iran. And then we came back. We spent a couple months in America, and then when I was really young, we moved to Libya, where my dad worked for Oasis Oil and got involved in petroleum. So from that, when I was about 3, we moved to Saudi Arabia, and I spent from 3 till 16 in Saudi Arabia, living inside of a Western compound. I describe it as like white picket sand dunes. It's this like 1950s America where everybody's married, everyone like comes home for dinner, and you have a active family life and an active social life. Nobody locked their doors. Nobody, you know, we left our keys in our car. Saudi Arabia is an incredibly safe place. I mean, we can talk more about what the relationship between that safety and punitive forms of punishment are, because there is a direct line there. But that cultural impact just really affected my life at a core level. When I lived in Saudi Arabia, I always thought of myself as an American. And then when I moved back to America, I moved to a small town in Florida called Sarasota, which is coincidentally also the place where MAPS was founded. Yeah. I met Rick Doblin when I was 17, and I snuck on to New College to a little First Fridays event at the Banyan Tree Cafe. So Sarasota is its own sort of unique breeding ground. But to not.
So I just want to chime in there, since you brought up Sarasota and Rick and that school. I was driving him once from Venice to the airport. I was fanboying and stalking him, and I found out he was from Southern California. And I think I had already read Acid Test, right, which talks a lot, or what, I forget which book, where he kind of narrates his development at the college. And I just remember him talking about, you know, nude sunbathing. So I'm wondering, did you get a chance to sunbathe nude with Rick?
I'm shy. Growing up in Saudi Arabia, my parents were crazy people. My parents had a clothing optional. We lived in an incredibly repressive Saudi Arabian theocracy, and in our backyard, my parents had a clothing not allowed hot tub. So like, my parents would take me to nudist camps when I was young, and I was always the like shy one wearing clothes, and that's retained itself to this day. So no, I have not, unfortunately, experienced a nude sunbathing moment with Rick. Although it's a great story. We might have to work towards one of those. I know he loves hot tubs.
I think just invite him to your folks for the holidays. You're good. All right, back to the story at hand. Growing up in white picket sand dunes, which I think you should copyright or trademark.
It's a potential idea for a documentary about growing up in Saudi Arabia. And really, you know, storytelling has been my first love. And I learned that through a tradition of Saudi Arabian mystical storytelling. And also my father is an amazing storyteller. Like, I feel like the movie Big Fish was made for me. It's one of those things where my whole life I could never believe any of the things my father would say, but I always knew he believed them. And as you know, as he has come to pass, and as I've transitioned into sort of knowing him more as an adult, the stories just kept bearing out, you know, and I was like, oh my God, he is as crazy as I ever thought he was, you know. For instance, back to Saudi Arabia, I lived there are, you know, maybe two stories I could tell about that before moving on. The first one is directly regarding the Gulf War, but actually both of them are going to be about the Gulf War. 1991, I was 11 years old, and I was we were on vacation back in Florida, and my dad's like, here, you know, here's some quarters, go get the newspaper. And we were by the pool, and I got the newspaper from my dad, one of the little, you know, pop out newspaper boxes, and carried it over to him. And I looked on the front page, and it was, you know, Iraq invades Kuwait. And I was like, okay, Kuwait's really close. And I remember seeing my dad's face when I handed him the newspaper, and it was this mixture of excitement and more excitement, maybe. For like living in Iran during the fall of the Shah, living in Libya during Khomeini, there was, you know, clearly my dad did not shy away from situations that other people could consider dangerous. So I could feel, though, like with my mom's presence, like that there was some concern, and I heard the discussions about, like, should we take Aramco's offer to work in Houston for the same pay, or should we go back to Saudi Arabia and get double overtime? And my dad was like, it can't be worse than Iran. It's not going to be worse than Libya. come on, you know, like, and she's like, okay. And I remember flying back, and the airplane was like empty. We were like the only ones on the airplane.
Yeah, it's kind of like after
right?
9/11.
Right.
Yeah. Was your dad a petroleum engineer, Sean, or what did he do for?
He's an electrical engineer. He was,
Electrical engineer.
but he transitioned into data warehousing. So his big thing for a long time was SAP, BD development. So he would work on like early metadata information systems, you know, things that become now kind of run by AI. He was a big. Also, my love of sci-fi comes directly from my father.
We'll definitely dip into that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was sort of like a defining moment for me. And like I said, my dad was a adventurous human, a pioneer. For instance, you know, there were dozens of Scud attacks, right, while I lived there, and very often they would blow out our windows. And we would have to put on like the government issued gas masks and go into our safe room, which was the bathroom. It wasn't particularly safe, you know. We taped off the doors.
So you didn't have the basement with the 5 years worth of food and the flat screen TV.
No, we did not have access to any of the prepping materials other than the gas masks, which were the only Israeli things that were allowed in Saudi Arabia.
Imagine that.
I bet their gas masks work a hell of a lot better than, well, I won't say what country gas masks I had to use, but yeah.
So work. The respirators don't work well at all, unfortunately. I had a lot of experience with those as well, Christian. Fume hoods are really the way to go.
Right. Not an RV out in the desert.
No. So I would go into the safe room, you know, and very often attacks would happen during the school day when I was alone with my little sister. Wow. And we would get our dog and, you know, bring us into the safe room and run the bathtub for a little while. And so those are some defining memories of sort of having to be self-reliant and having to work well under pressure. And I think that those experiences sort of like defined my character to a large degree, because going forward, I've done some things which people might consider to be risky, but I look at them, I'm like, this isn't half as risky as anything my dad's ever done. So we're going to be fine, you know?
It's really interesting to hear you talk about risk though, Sean, because I think, you know, as George has been amplifying and engaging in all these conversations with various people with plant medicine and psychedelics, and clearly the underground, right? Not going to get into the gray market. It's either black or white. The gray thing really confuses me. It's either legal or it's not. And, you know, attorneys will give you 100 different answers. But it sounds like your dad took very calculated risk, right? They're taking risk without doing the math. And since he was an electrical engineer and a doer and a maker, it sounds like he did the math. It's like, oh, we could live in the suburbs of Houston, or we could live in the downtown part of Dallas, which is sketch, or we could live in the Middle East, which isn't as sketch for reasons. Like he didn't take those risks without considering the possibilities of things. And I feel like you're kind of like that too. You're pushing the edges on a lot of things, but you're doing it very thoughtfully.
I would agree with that. I mean, you mentioned I had some experience with large scale engineering projects, and the entirety of really any businessman's job to a large degree, if you're an entrepreneur, a large degree of that job is managing risk. So it works both in a professional sense and in a personal sense. And it's crucial to navigate waters where you have known unknowns, you know, to quote the incredibly eloquent Donald Rumsfeld, you know.
Hey, wait a minute. That sounds a lot.
The territory of the unknown unknowns. Your risk exponentially increases, right? So
I appreciate you quoting Rumsfeld, but I'm pretty sure it was Werner Erhard and S.
Indeed, it was.
There you go.
That coined that phrase. So let's go to the root source, get the citation right.
Oh, thank you. I was stuck in the Gulf War.
Fair enough.
I can just hear the soundbite. No.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, geez. So I think this next story, just briefly, I'll try to speaks to like the next thing, which I think is really important, which is about framing a narrative, right? Because we can tell ourselves a lot of different stories about things that occur to us. And as I said, like a number of times a month, we would be under Scud attacks, right? Which basically means that there are these like massive missiles heading towards your house, because my house was directly on top of the second largest oil well in the world. And right adjacent to us was the U.S. Air Force Base. So like a Scud missile, basically, they're not like programmed GPS, like guided missiles. You basically get them and you're like, okay, that way, Saudi Arabia, fire, you know? And they're not incredibly high tech, right? So there was a lot of collateral damage potentiality. And one of the times that a Scud missile was intercepted by a Patriot, because that's the ballistic missile interference system that the U.S. Brought to safeguard their assets, right? Luckily, we were part of those assets. So a Scud missile will be coming, the Patriot missile intercepted and exploded, and then it'll crash to the ground with all of the refuse, right? And when a Patriot can make a direct strike on the warhead, it'll explode and the shrapnel will be small, but when it'll hit the tail of the missile, it'll spiral and land and then explode. So in that case, that happened, and it exploded around 1.5 miles away from our house, and in the middle of the desert, and created like almost 200 foot deep crater, right? And this is like a place I go to play in the desert, right? Like this is not like an unknown space, and that freaked me out. I was handling things pretty well. I was okay. And it was like 3 weeks before Christmas. And, you know, my mom could tell that I was taking that one hard. And so she got me and my little sister, and we drove out to the hole in the ground. And we got out of the car, and there were other people around taking pictures, other families. And my mom was like, all right, Sean, Tiffany, you're going to go collect these little pieces of the metal. And my dad was like, all right, so the big chunky ones are the Scud missiles. Those are made with like steel and like iron, and they're not really, you know, like high tech. And then the light, you know, pieces, those are from Patriot missiles. See if you can find both. And so my little sister and I just wandered into the crater and started like picking little pieces. And like, I was scared at first. Yeah. But then I came back up, and my mom's like, all right, we're going to take these home, and we're going to make Christmas ornaments out of them. And we got the little Scud pieces, and we wrapped some little wire about them, and we put little like Christmas lights, and we hung them on our tree. And I'll tell you, you know, from personal experience, it's really difficult to be scared of something that's a Christmas ornament. So I just want to say, like, I have a deep gratitude to both of my parents, who are unfortunately both have passed at this point, for teaching me how to think rationally and logically, helping me manage risk. My dad brought me into his still, because alcohol is illegal in Saudi Arabia. So my dad was like,
he's a bootlegger.
You're 11 years old. Like, come on in and help me with the mash tank. My still, you know, like make sure the still isn't running dry. You can run the steel one, but you can't run the glass or brass ones yet. Right. Wow. So at 11 years old, I was distilling and moonshining. Right. And to my mother. And so, you know, just going from that to cannabis, where there's ethanol, you know, like ethanol extraction as one option, and then hydrocarbons as another. I had a little bit of experience with both of them. So fast forward to my cannabis career, and you can see why extraction was sort of like an easy adoption for me, and why the companies I founded were really successful at helping people scale and bring cannabis extraction sort of into a modern, ethical, and medicine-focused space, right? So that's kind of a whole nother chapter. We'll
hit this question from Anil, and then I want to talk about a through line, to this arc, I got a couple ideas.
Nice. Anil, thank you so much for being here and hanging out with us. Anil got a question for you over here, Sean. He says, question for Sean. Do you envision psychedelic therapy playing a role in Saudi Arabia or other Middle Eastern countries in the near future? If so, how?
Fantastic question, Anil. Thank you for joining, by the way. It's great to see you and hear you. So the real quick answer to that is it's already present. You can talk to my friend Haya Al-Shahani. She runs the Arab Psychedelic Society. She's amazing. She's also a female guitar player in an all-female band in Saudi Arabia that kicks. They're great. So ketamine is already being used in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia, and in UAE. In most cases, an IV therapy, including IV drip with therapeutic components. So there's already a space for limited psychedelic therapeutic use in the Middle East. Shakruna just released a recent article talking about the roots of psychedelic assisted therapy in Egypt, going back to the use of LSD for like 60 or so patients that's in one hospital and potentially a lot more in another. So there is a history of these compounds and a current use case. What I think there also is a specific religious component to Islam that prevents the use of intoxicants. So I think that's going to be a further refining conversation that needs to happen culturally, religiously, and scientifically inside the Middle East to allow religious experts to make guidelines regarding the nature of these compounds. So very often hashish is not considered psychedelic or an intoxicant in the Middle Eastern cultures, whereas alcohol is considered an intoxicant. So I think there's a case to be made that certain psychedelics, when used under certain protocols, might be beneficial and might also be in alignment with Sharia and with Islamic guidelines. So I foresee that future. And I know there are a number of people within the kingdom and within the greater Gulf states and within the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa region that are quietly making steps forward. So
two thoughts related to that response, and I think you are much closer to the whole conversation than I am, so I'm just riffing. One is I just finished for a recent book club reading Red Tent, and that whole story, if you're not familiar with it, pretty powerful, about kind of the female's narrative during kind of biblical times, and that story is really powerful, and it just makes me think about history in general, and then religious text, depends on who had the pen last and who edited it. But then you also have interpretation by current religious leaders, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, and clearly in the Muslim world, who's your caliph? Are you Sharia, or are you, Shiite? And what's going on in your tribe and what's going on in your greater community? I have a really good friend, I won't name him, in Los Angeles. His family's part of what we lovingly call the Persian real estate mafia. And so these are like Persian Jews living in LA. And he would tell me a lot of interesting stories about his dad and their buddies going on camping trips, and they'd be out at the tent and they're all smoking opium. And it wasn't considered. Yeah. So how you define intoxicants, how you define drug, what the cultural reference point is, right?
So, I mean, Persia is a whole nother cultural landscape. And I think so the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, are heavily influenced by Bedouin culture. And that's a non-cosmopolitan culture very often. Persian culture is perhaps the oldest cosmopolitan culture that we know of. And if you say in the Middle East, definitely. Zoroastrian culture, for instance, which is a bedrock of Persian influence, have been using homa, a sacred sacramental plant that we believe is Syrian rue, since antiquity, right? Like this is one of the, homa and soma, right? So the Persians and the Hindu people, right? Intimately connected people. They're cousins or siblings, right? So these cosmopolitan cultures have been utilizing the top grade psychedelic and drug technology since time immemorial, right? Opium, homa, soma, Syrian rue, potentially mycological components. The pharmacopoeia of the ancients is disputed, but coming more deeply into focus. And the Near East was the melting pot of all of these different entheogenic psychedelic legacies, right? So the Scythians, right, who brought cannabis not just into the Near East, but also into India and also into Europe, used a number of different compounds. In fact, their female Scythians were part of a poison cult. The poison cult mixing with the Proto-Greek cultures is very likely what created both the lesser and the greater Eleusinian mysteries, right? So you can go back to Egypt, right, where we've got some pretty solid evidence from dynastic times, pharaonic times, where vessels where they did add mixtures of drugs that include scopolamines, that include, actually, I'm not going to list them because I'll probably be incorrect about their specific pictures, but they include a number of different drugs. I call them an add-mixture when you mix a number of things together, particularly sometimes in a wine or a beer. They also included, human DNA, right? And potentially these are things like blood or various different secretions. We can go into more detail about what those might be. You can imagine, fertility-related secretions very often.
I don't think we have to do that this morning. We don't need to talk about those secretions and consumption. No, we're on track. We're on track. Holy Moses. You had a question, I think, from
Caesar.
Oh.
Absolutely, I got him right here.
Love you, Caesar.
Everyone should check out Caesar's channel. He's an incredible individual, doing a lot of great work out there. Just coming back fresh from Colombia, I think. Let me get him up on the board over here. There we go. Shout out to Caesar. Everybody check him out. The great Caesar Marin says, Latin America is a huge market. There is a mushroom and Aya culture that is growing. How do we tap into that conversation?
I think the first place to start for me would be engage the lineage holders and approach in a space of respect, reverence, and reciprocity. So
can you talk a little bit more about reciprocity? I think that word gets thrown around a lot, and a lot of people share it with good intentions and meaning. But to quote Princess Bride, I don't think they know what that word means. Or I'm paraphrasing.
Reciprocity is a deep listening and an intense commitment to building lasting good for the cultures and the people you're working with on both an individual and a community-based level. So reciprocity can mean a lot of things in a lot of different places, and it's primarily up to the individuals themselves to guide the conversation around how reciprocity might be best managed. I would not claim to be an expert on this, but I do have an intense commitment to supporting indigenous cultures and to strengthening conversations and to deep listening. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So we need to use those ears and then offer our hands, because there's monetary donations, which are absolutely necessary. And that has to be a component of any reciprocity. The disbursement and ethical disbursement of funds is a part of that, right? But another part of that is active participatory support, right? And we can look to, former President Jimmy Carter for something like this, like go and build a home with these people, go and like help them put a thatch roof on their hut, go and help catch some fish with them. If you're living and being with these people, like be with them and learn what they need, because without that listening, without that participatory component, then very often whatever good we think we're doing is short-term and potentially hazardous to those people in the long run. And we also have to let go of our cultural biases, right? That we think we know what's good for indigenous people. In the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, the king put forth this decree in the 90s and said they went and kidnapped all these Bedouins, lived in the desert, lived in tents, brought them back and gave them nice cars, nice homes, and AC and jobs, right? They thought that was going to help modernize Saudi Arabia. But what happened was the Bedouin people, who are indigenous people, decided, F this, I don't want to be, I forget about your Ferrari, forget about your AC. I want to go back to the way of life that makes sense to me, that my parents and grandparents lived. And they walked back they left their cars and walked back into the middle of the freaking desert. Not all of them, but a significant number, right? So when we make assumptions about what indigenous people want or need, we're going to get it wrong every time. So to speak, thank you for bringing up the Nagoya protocols. The Bwiti people have set forth a clear guideline for what reciprocity means in terms of their relationship with Iboga tambonath, right? The tree that is the source of the ibogaine and iboga medicines. And I think that every protocol and every reciprocity initiative is the beginning of a conversation, maybe not the end of a conversation. Everything, there can be refinements, there can be renewed commitments, there can be additional support, right? But we have to think about these things, and Caesar, being with people in a heart-based way is my first and only recommendation. Listening, I guess I have two.
So George, I'm hogging the question stick. I'm gonna hand it
Not
back
at
to
all,
you.
man. Like, I feel like I'm doing a lot of learning here, so I'm just taking it all in, man. I'm grateful for it. And to everybody out in the chat that's out here playing a role, my heart goes out to you. Thank you to everybody being here. I got a bunch of people lining up over here and some questions of my own. And the first couple center around psychedelic science and policy. The first question coming in for you is, you're working at the crossroads of psychedelic science and global innovation. If you could rewrite the creation myth of modern psychedelic medicine, what story would you tell to guide its future?
Whoever asked that question, you should answer it too. Yeah.
There you go, the individual.
Yeah. Be your own truth. Be the change you want to see in the world. But if I were to be the change I want to see in the world, I would look back to indigenous cultures from all over the world. I would look to communities and cultures that have utilized entheogenic, psychedelic, entactogenic compounds throughout history. I would do the research and not make the assumptions, so that I can actually look at granular details and find causality, not correlation, right? But I would look to indigenous cultures and I would see what potential benefits we have from a cultural adoption of these type of sacred medicines. I would look what these compounds have done for us in the past.
Yeah.
And then I would dream into the psychedelic assisted future that I want to live in, right? A psychedelic assisted future where these compounds are widely available, non-toxic, regulated, and not pushed on everyone. Because the idea that everyone can benefit from a psychedelic experience, I think, is erroneous and hyperbolic. So we hold these in right relations, even in a place like classical Greece, where thousands and thousands of people every year engaged in the greater mysteries. Not everyone did. And that critical mass of cultural awakening created a flourishing of culture unlike anything we've seen in the Western world. Philosophy, science, mathematics, democracy, culture, theater.
Yeah.
The first long form poems in the narrative culture, right? Like, these are byproducts of psychedelic assisted culture. These are byproducts of wide adoption in a safe, systematic, controlled setting, right? These are not like dose our children and see what happens. These are repeatable experiences that are navigated with a educated population, a incredibly detailed creation story and creation myth, and a defined cultural impact, right? So esteemed scholar Carl Ruck, who's an amazing classicist who I have the great honor of getting to sit with on a number of occasions because I right now live a couple hours away from Berkeley. He said something really powerful about the ancient classic Greek people. He says, Mark Hoffman, who's in the lineage, right, of the Ruck, he says the culture with the best drugs wins. And then when Ruck described what that means, he said, it's not about the drugs necessarily. It's about the inflow of cultural expression, right? So you have people coming from Egypt, you have people coming to ancient Greece, you have people come from Egypt, from Spain, from Turkey, from all over the world, bringing their commodities, bringing their knowledge, sharing their language and culture. And they're doing this because of drug tourism. They're doing this because Greater Elysian Mystery is a repeatable, ecstatic experience that is renowned around the ancient world. So all of the flourishing culturally happened not just from expanded minds and increased creative human problem solving. It also happened through cultural exchange and interaction, right? And so that's what I hope for in our future. I hope that we can engage with the other as self. I hope that we can build bridges. I hope that we can design compounds that are safe for almost everyone to use. I hope that we can share an ancestral indigenous knowledge in a way that predicates our flourishing and encourages the flourishing of all people, not just white males who own psychedelic companies.
So let me ask you, because you got me really excited about Mark Hoffman. Where did you said the lineage, and then where is he a professor today or author?
So Mark Hoffman is the lineage holder for the Ruck. Carl Ruck lives with him currently. He's not in great health. He's the archivist at the Wasson West Archives. He's an amazing psychedelic researcher and archivist. Big contributor to the community just in large. I'm a huge fan of Mark Hoffman's. I met him through the Sasha community, and through Mark Martini, who's currently the chemist at residence, living at the farm and kind of shepherding the legacy.
I feel like I might have met Mark at one of the farm events. Does he get out there?
Mark is frequently at the farm.
Yeah, okay.
He lives in Lafayette. When he's here on the West Coast, he lives bi-coastal. He's, back and forth from Boston to to Lafayette, right outside of Berkeley.
Well,
So yeah, I think you might have met him. He's great.
Is a lot better than bipolar, which is what I feel like I'm living a lot of the time. So
you're in good company.
Bi-coastal's great. You mentioned Carl. I'll try and pull Mark's info. It's available there.
Mark likes to hide.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we'll leave him on. Are you familiar with Betty Kovac's work?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Merchants of Light speaks deeply to a lot of the things that you're talking about, and understanding mythologies and where a lot of the world's great religions were sprouted from. And then how, once again, the person with the last one to hold the pen gets to write the text, losing the divine feminine in some of these mythologies and cultural reference points, and how that shows up in the world of psychedelics. I wonder if that's a point you want to hit on.
Well, if I were to choose a word, I wouldn't choose losing. Obfuscating or hiding or
redacting
to obliterate, right? So
yeah.
Like I was talking about the Near East and spiritual systems in the Near East and how they're deeply intertwined with psychedelic legacy. There is a hierarchical and male-dominated legacy that also stems from these cultures. We in the West uptook that, and it's been a couple thousand years that we've been telling stories that don't serve us, right? And I think agriculture played a really big role here. When you have a pre-agricultural society, you have equality of tasks, right? So female and male groups and individuals can equally find sustenance based off of the hunter and gatherer model, right? But when we developed the plow, then all of a sudden that model was turned on its head, and we see that around the same time as the technology of the plow emerged, we see these two major effects. Number one, the canceling of the sacred feminine, and number two, the objectifying of all other animals and the supremacy of humanity, right? So if I'm gonna I'll talk about domestication first. If I'm gonna put a yoke on an animal and beat it all day long in order for it to feed me, I have to believe that animal is of lesser value than I am. I can't do it otherwise. I have no moral capacity to be brutal unless I justify my brutality by saying I'm superior. God gave me dominion over all of the plants and animals, right? So that's a story we've been telling for a very long time. A lot of the Abrahamic religions are still telling that story and have been enforcing that story ad nauseum. So that's domestication. The second part of that is if I'm strong, if I have a stronger upper body strength, that typically there's a slight difference in upper body strength between male and female. And if you go back, then there might be a stronger case for that. If a woman can no longer say, I don't want to be with you, man, you're abusive, I'm going to go and take our children, but now I need to find another man to plow for me, or we're going to starve because I've given up, or I've been forced to give up my ancestral understanding of how to forage and gather in the woods, and the woods have been leveled to make room for more of your freaking plow space, like more fields. So we have this technology driving culture phenomenon, right? And I'm not the first one to talk about this. I'm not coming up with new ideas here. These are like anthropologically studied and fairly strongly supported ideas, right? So in my opinion, if you go back, everything was feminine, because we understood birth and the mystery of childbirth to be the one of the defining factors of all culture, and culture in and outside of humanity, right? Because the mother feeds all things, right? And at least all things that we could see, right? And when you want to disconnect someone from their heritage, then you can tell them a story that benefits you rather than benefits them. And so I think it's really important to look at the way these stories have come to be, the impetus behind the stories, and potentially that'll give us a better capacity in our own lives to make choices based off of agency, and rather than choices based off of cultural norms that are not serving us.
I can think of a couple fantastic female guests, George, that could go
Yeah.
deep this topic, and we might even be able to get a hold of Betty, which would be pretty awesome if she wanted to join us for a chat.
That would be awesome.
And please move on to something else before I continue to mansplain about
Yeah, good idea. Okay,
Jesus.
I got
got
some
you.
over here.
I got
Oh my God.
you go, George, and then I'll go. You go.
You know, it's so interesting. We talk about different culture, and we talk. That's what's going on. Look at this guy, a bunch of white guys over here.
Let me explain the pain of childbirth. Do you know
Okay,
that monthly cycle? Oh, sorry.
Imperfect Human Award. Still, we are all just works in progress, myself included. So
you get a
for
mulligan.
allowing me to put my foot in my mouth and then chew on it. Take it out. Sorry, George, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's awesome, man. It's no worries.
You don't need to play golf to get a mulligan. Go,
You know,
George.
when I think about psychedelics and like psychedelic architecture, and there's a lot of talk about psychedelic culture. We brought up the mysteries earlier and the idea of domestication and hierarchy a little bit, but it seems to me, and just in my opinion, that psychedelics are a tool for self-discovery. And when sometimes we get lost in this idea of building an industry or building things around culture, but isn't the true dimension of culture an individual discovering what their gifts are? And it seems to me like that's the gift of psychedelics. Like each individual gets to develop and see in themselves the beauty that they can contribute. Isn't that where the culture comes from?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? What is culture other than a group of individuals? Right. So what's a river other than a collection of water drops? Right. So I think the same thing goes for culture. In the same way, the reason I bring up the analogy of the river is because rivers mold their environment the ways cultures mold their environment. And once you're going down a certain path that becomes the path of least resistance, it becomes difficult to shift that culture. The way I believe it happens is just like in a river, individual drops of water choose to go that way.
Yeah.
Choose to go in opposition or in discordance to the cultural flow. And by doing that, once it reaches a critical mass, that creates a new tributary in a river. It creates a new flourishing of the environment that carves out its own path, and a new culture then shapes the landscape, right? And this isn't the reason I also love the river analogy, is because it's not reductionist. I don't lose the first river.
Yeah.
Well,
when I change culture, I don't destroy what comes before me. I add to it, right?
Well, and your river analogy plays a bunch of interesting ways. Number one, yes, raindrops, but snow melt and a lot of water sources, right? So that's interesting to play with because they're all water, right? They're all H2O in some form in transition. So that's cool. And then to your point, there's a lot of inertia, right? It's all about physics at that point, and the river's going to go where the river goes until there's a cultural dissonance, which may be generated by awareness or raising consciousness or plant medicine or breath work or who knows what. Then all of a sudden you got this low tributary, and then more people hear about it, and then they get on George's show, and the next thing you know, the mighty Mississippi's like flowing through Arizona or whatever. So
and what value could a new water source bring to a desert.
Yeah.
Right. That's why the
Yep.
tributaries are so important, and that's why the non-reductionist thinking when it comes to developing culture and supporting cultures, to me, seems to be the way to go. I'm not. I would say I'm not the one who came up with this idea again. Like I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. You know, like from the Wiccan chant, "We all come from the goddess, and to her we shall return. Like a drop of rain flows into the ocean."
Mm.
Right. That's one source of that analogy. And then, you know, Daniel Quinn's phenomenal book, The Story of B, would be another place that I would just. So Daniel Quinn wrote Ishmael, which is great, like entry point into cultural shift and cultural awakening. But then he wrote another book called The Story of B, which is like a practical how-to book. It's like, you want to change culture? This is how you do it. Right. And it's brilliant. It really, it's Ishmael came up. There's a movie that sort of takes a little bit of what Ishmael did. It's pretty good, but it's the idea of leavers versus takers, you know, as the framing for indigenous versus non-indigenous peoples and their behavior systems.
Got a question from the audience.
Yes.
Nice.
I want to jump real quick before we get to Reed. Like, I think there's another part of that, a river. I think there's another part of that a river analogy. Like, all rivers flow into the ocean, and the ocean is like the lowest spot. So everything's coming back to source on some level. And then if you look at the way we dam things up, like look at the way we come in and fundamentally, radically change ecosystems so we can dam up the water. Of course, things aren't going to flow the way they are. And I don't know, it seems like a pretty good analogy for where we are. But let me jump over here to Reed. Reed, thank you so much for being here. I hope your day is absolutely beautiful. He says, I have a question for Sean. What is the best compound to microdose and why? Thank you, Reed.
Okay. Great question, Reed. I've been on a kick for a while about microdosing safety. And
Beautiful.
that comes down to a number of different factors, some of which are well known, right? So we have factors like contamination. We have factors like shelf life. We have factors like, back to Christian's point about the gray market, there is no such thing. There is a black market and there is a white market. So if it is not in the white market, it is in the black market. And what sort of actual controls do you have there? But because I'm a like scientifically curious human, I dig a little deeper, and I would say this is also because of my love and adoration for the Shulgin legacy. I am going to speak on some things right now that have some anecdotal evidence, but have a little bit less credible, double-blind clinical trial evidence than I usually like to speak about. I tend to focus on things that are empirical. And in this case, I'm going to be empirical adjacent. So I want to just make that clear, because there are no really strong studies about microdosing that aren't self-reporting. And self-reporting has significant risks and significant challenges to overcome. So there also aren't any microdosing studies to date that are a large enough scale to show efficacy along a number of different guidelines, right? So one of the things I'm concerned about is a kind of relatively under-communicated issue, which is the receptor. It's a serotogenic receptor issue, right? When you take a classic psychedelic as a microdose, right, and those classic psychedelics could include psilocybin from magic mushrooms, LSD, emerging things that people are microdosing now, things like ibogaine. They impact a certain series of receptors, right? And let's talk about psilocybin, for instance, because psilocybin is the most broadly microdosed compound currently. The psilocybin's action is primarily on the 5-HT2B. Okay, I'm not going to dig into that. So it's on a specific serotogenic receptor. What happens is when you strike a receptor, very often you have cascading effect that strikes the receptors nearby as well. The receptor that is specifically responsible for the psychedelic action of the classic psychedelics is adjacent to a receptor that, when stimulated over long periods of time, causes a chronic heart condition that is fatal. And I do not feel like enough research has been done on, for instance, microdosing psilocybin to prove that long-term use is actually safe for humans with heart conditions or with the potential for heart conditions. And I say this because the science points in that direction. And one of my premier mentors that I never met, Sasha Shulgin, died of a heart condition that is very likely influenced by his consumption of serotogenic drugs that affected the 5-HT2B receptor, which over long periods of time caused his chronic heart valve thickening, caused his death. All right. So it, like the Stamets protocol for microdosing, or the the Fadiman protocols, right? They suggest days off, and they say, well, this is so you don't build up a tolerance. The Stamets protocol puts niacin in there for flushing. Well, they know about the 5-HT2B action, but they can't tell you, like, I'm selling you these products that could be dangerous to you, and we don't know. Psychedelic drugs are very safe when used inconsistently. Psychedelic drugs are not proven to be safe when not used consistently. So I've been on this sort of quest to find something safe to microdose. I like LSD because you're using it like at micrograms, so it's hard. And also, like, Lady Amanda Fielding, rest in power, did not have any heart defect issues, and she took large doses of LSD almost every day for 40 years, 50 years. Ask her, when you meet her in the pearly gates, and I think she might say every day. So I think there's a little bit less risk there, but it still has action on the receptor that I'm concerned about. And I came to a rather counterintuitive discovery, which was that the classic psychedelic with the most overt cardiac risk is the only classic psychedelic that doesn't have action on the chronic heart thickening serotogenic, and that's ibogaine. So when taken at high doses, ibogaine can be toxic for your heart, but when taken at microdoses, particularly of, like, I think they called PTA, purified total alkaloids, particularly from that combination of products, I find that science is starting to prove and starting to show that it can be a safe, efficacious microdosing product, right? So I hold a lot of hope for deeper research, and I also hope that I am proven wrong about the risk associated with psilocybin, because I think there's so much value in people microdosing psilocybin-bearing mushrooms and having a deep relationship with the fungal structure itself, particularly when they're not taking synthetic versions and they're able to, actually access the plant medicine itself. Psilocybin is one of the few that I think there is despite Maria Sabina's statement to Hoffman that there was no difference between the synthetic psilocybin and the natural mushrooms, I do think there are some qualitative potential differences between the scope of the potential psychedelic action there with baeocystin and a number of the other different compounds found in the magic mushroom that aren't present in the synthetic. Also, of note, the synthetic most widely available, the 4-ACO DMT, is a prodrug of psilocybin, which is a prodrug of psilocin. So you're doubling the metabolism in order to contain an effect. And if that's the pharmacology, which I'm starting to doubt, because we have these anecdotal people saying, oh, I'm boofing 4-ACO and we're getting these immediate results. Well, if it has to, that can't work. If it's
So wait, you're throwing out some amazing terms that I'm or George may be familiar with, and not everyone in the audience. So
So there are a number of different routes.
Wait, pro-drug first. What's a pro-drug? Maybe talk about pro-drugs and analogs versus traditional.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christian. So a pro-drug is a compound that metabolizes into a psychoactive compound. So a pro-drug very often is not psychoactive itself. In fact, that's part of the definition of pro-drug. So that's why I'm saying 4-ACO may not be simply a pro-drug. It might be a metabolite in the metabolite chain, but I think there might be some action unique to that, right? Which would differentiate the synthetic psilocybin from the psilocybin itself.
And then you're talking about bufo, and people could confuse bufo with 5-MeO-DM. Like, let's be careful about
so I said
delivery methods and transportation of molecules versus the molecule.
So I said boofing.
I'm aware. I'm very clear. Thank you. I'll get you some Rick Simpson capsules later.
Yes. So Caesar is asking for some clarification.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, this is where it gets juicy.
On the 5-HT2B action. So based on my belief is that because of the microgram, because of this exponential difference in the dosage, right? So if I'm taking milligrams of a psilocybin versus UG or micro of an LSD product, there's a massive difference on how much action it could cause, right? So because the affinity of LSD specifically for the action is towards the serotogenic receptor that causes the psychedelic effect. If it has impact on the receptors nearby, it's got to be minimum. And so then minimizing that minimum probably puts you in a safe place. And I'm saying that specifically because, as using Lady Amanda Fielding as an example, I would be very surprised if, and she's not an N of one. She's among, dozens of people I know who are in their, who lived to their 70s or 80s and utilized LSD. I mean, at huge doses, all the time, daily, for decades, and didn't have any heart valve thickening issues. The Randalls are another, group that's, similar to that. So I think you can say the risk is probably a lot lower with LSD. But LSD has its own issues because right now LSD, the gray market or black market LSD includes, up to 30% ISO LSD, which even 1% will start degrading the LSD and destroying your actives and creating some non-desirable effects, right? So, on the black market, LSD, pure LSD crystals, used to cost $25,000-$30,000, and now I've been told by people you can find a gram of LSD, which is tens of thousands of hits. You can get that for $1,000 or $2,000, but it'll turn black within 3 weeks.
I met those guys at Burning
Man. So you have to be safe. Supply is a real issue, right? Yeah. And until we have a safe drug supply with a chain of custody that's monitored by some sort of outside or potentially industry-specific regulatory body, we're going to have issues and problems, and each molecule is going to have its own issues, right? Again, that's one of the reasons why I think ibogaine is an ideal medicine to microdose if you can source it and find it. It's an incredibly easy extraction process that creates a durable and efficacious and dependable product, right? So whereas psilocybin, right, has an incredibly short shelf life, LSD has these contamination issues because a lot of it's being made in China right now or being sourced from persons in China that have problems. So if you're looking actually for a real plant-derived medicine, which I think a lot of people are when they're microdosing, you're going to go to an ibogaine or a purified total alkaloid source, right? Hopefully you can find that through, the right protocols, through someone who's working directly in reciprocity with the Bwiti people and the Nagoya protocols. But either way, you're going to have a compound that's shelf stable, safe, and when taken at, 5, 10, 15, 20 milligrams by people who have no existing heart conditions, showing a lot of promise, also for things like Parkinson's, for things like sclerosis, for things like traumatic brain injury, right? You see,
I'm tapping in because Parkinson's, and the last conversation that George and I had on the True Life Gray Matter thing was Dr. Erin Raskin and her personal navigation of a Parkinson's diagnosis in 2018 and a bunch of referrals, introductions that I made, and a lot of work she did on her own because she's an amazing researcher and she doesn't stop at the first introduction. She's like 10, 12 steps deep. Now knows probably just about everybody in the ibogaine space that's working legally and some others that are in the underground. And she's exploring microdosing protocols and other things. We didn't get specifics last time, but she's seeing efficacy personally, and that's use case of one. But I think it'd be really in her particular anecdotal sharing. That's yes. So what you brought up, though, I think I attended, and this is all still in the family. One of the Warrior Side events that Diego Ugalde hosts on Monday night or something. And there was this brilliant former SEAL, I think he was battalion commander or somebody. You could tell he had the bearing. That he was up the food chain a few notches. I mean, all SEALs have a certain, come from. And then there's their like officer corps. It's a whole nother thing. And he did this amazing job with his through line, which I want to come back to with yours, which is like the world or your life splits. And he talked about the world splitting before and after 9/11, right? And the world splits. The world that you and I have shared before and after having a child, right? As being dads, like there's before and there's after, and there's a radical demarcation, and you don't need to even think about it. It's just, it's visceral, it's intuitive. So there's a split, I feel, that's happening in the world around psychedelics and culture. And it's like before normalization and post normal. I don't even want to talk about legalization or decrim or adoption or whatever, like normalization, right? If we just get if we get it normalized and destigmatized, right, the other things will follow. I don't think legalization is going to happen first and then destigmatized. I think it's got to be normalized first, and then we have a shot at legalization. But there are definitely camps, and I don't want to name names because I don't want to be judging those that judge, right? Like just as an observer, there's these camps around dereg, decrim, regulatory at all. No regulatory. We have to be anarchists, right, George? Everyone's DIY. It's all good. Everybody can just grow their own and use their own. But there's benefits to regulations. And it's not always government regulation. It can be self-regulation, right? I'm a cognitive libertarian. Doesn't mean everybody should be using psychedelics. It also doesn't mean we want a supply chain that isn't clean. It also doesn't mean we don't want dosing protocols that are meaningful and safe. And I kind of want to get away from the harm reduction thing, just health and wellness dosage. Let's talk about that. So let's talk about how you think about regulatory, and then maybe riff a little bit on citizen science, because you're definitely one of those.
Well, I have such a deep respect for people who are in the regulatory space 24/7. Like my friend Nuria over at Kaikian Analytics, which is based out of Spain. She's really working with some cutting edge conversations with politicians on how to reduce exposure to harm and increase potential for positive efficacy. And I think the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal are doing some really interesting and exciting things that we should look at in terms of decriminalization, in terms of really not blaming the end user of a quote unquote drug or medical compound, and looking more to the supply chain and ensuring that supply chains are not criminal organizations and enterprises. So I think that's a good general direction to go. I also think that in limited small jurisdictions that legalization is actually the most viable path forward. So that if you have small jurisdictions around the world legalizing specific compounds that resonate with their cultural legacy, then you're going to create a international chorus of pushing back against the drug war. And really, that's what we're talking about, right? There's this narrative that the drug war has all drugs are bad. There's no differentiation between heroin and fentanyl on one hand and the psychedelics on the other hand. It's just, they're all evil, right? I think that part of shifting that narrative to create more broad adoption is to create jurisdictional locations where adoption can be more broad. And we're already experiencing that, right? If you want to experience Aya, or you can go to places where that's legally available to use, right? Whether that's in a gray space like Costa Rica, or whether that's like Peru, where it's like indigenous. If you're using it under indigenous protocols, you are fully legal, right?
Yeah. There was a great panel at Psychedelic Science, and because Pablo Espanol Poco, like, being in the audience and paying attention to when it's half English and half Spanish. But it was all women on stage, from what I remember. They were all working in different Latin American or Central American. So I think it was Ecuador. Yeah, so there's 3.
I think it was Peru too.
Peru, and there was a Latinx attorney from the U.S. that was working on regs down there. And from what I remember, George, and we should probably get all 3 or 4 of those ladies on this show and recreate that panel because it was so powerful. I think Ecuador was the winner, where they basically got everything approved as long as it was being used in like indigenous settings and thresholds and like the way it has been. So it didn't matter if it was a tincture, or it didn't matter if it was a plant that was being smoked. It didn't, like, method and delivery. It's all good. And I think Ecuador was the only country where the local psychedelic society actually was recognized by the federal government, which blew my brains out. I'm like, how is that?
So that's the process I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Jamaica with psilocybin bearing mushrooms, Holland with psilocybin bearing mushrooms, now we've got Oregon and Colorado coming on board with some access to these compounds as well. Although there's a lot of conversations to be had about how on paper it may be one thing and in practice it may be another, and that there's a lot of work to still be done, and that maybe the state route for psychedelics isn't as viable as the state route was for cannabis. I think, changing the federal status of psychedelic compounds, specifically, maybe one at a time, but also, structurally saying all phenethylamines are now Schedule 2 or Schedule 3, right? All lysergamides are now Schedule 2. All tryptamines are now Schedule 3, right? So, like, I think if you do that on a federal level, you have a synthesis that occurs. If you do it on a state-by-state level or a regional level within a cited country, then you really don't have that happening. And I could go sort of in depth about why I believe that, but I think specific federal legalization for scientific use that includes prescription to healthy normals is essential. That's the license that we currently hold in Southern Africa in a small kingdom called Lesotho. And
let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So, all right, that's a real.
Well, let's wait. I got you. No, I know. So, live real time with George here. Sean, do you think you could come back on the show like in 3 or 6 weeks, maybe a month or 2, and tell us a little bit about some country,
round 2,
South Africa, where you may or may not be doing a project?
I would be an honor to come on the show again, and let's
save that.
Let's look to some future dates where I can speak a little bit more openly. But suffice to say, as a preview, there's a mountainous kingdom in southern Africa called Lesotho.
Lesotho, I think
Yeah.
is how that's spelled.
It's coincidentally the inspiration behind the fictional kingdom of Wakanda in the Black Panther series. It's has
Wait a minute. Are you working with the Wakandans on psychedelic research? You're working with the Wakandans on psychedelic research? Guacamole.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
You heard it here first. The Marvel universe is going to be very interested.
So yeah, the group that I'm one of the co-founders of has a just phenomenal and amazing license granted to us by the Ministry of Health in Lesotho to manage the entire ecosystem of psychedelic compounds, from import and export to local manufacturing and prescription to healthy normals. So we can, and over the last 3 years since I've received this license, we've been through a really intense vetting process of speaking with the psychedelic community and other co-founders and principals in the space to see how we can be a cooperative and beneficial ally to the entire space, rather than being in some sort of weird competition, right? So I'm really, really, really excited. Like Christian said, hopefully in the next, 4 to 8 weeks, I'll be able to announce some actionable dates for our first events, to speak a little bit more saliently about what we're doing, who we're bringing together, the compounds we're choosing to use, and the amazing relationships that we have with some of the most cutting edge companies in the psychedelic space with the most amazing molecules. So I'm a firm believer in better living through chemistry, and I think that it's almost impossible to improve upon certain happy accidents such as LSD. However, there are things that we can do to increase availability, to create increased levels of safety and efficacy, and to broaden the range of people who would benefit from having a altered state experience.
Can you clarify availability? Because some people will interpret that as like supply chain and packaged consumer goods, and I'm guessing you're talking about bioavailability. Maybe. I think availability is an incredibly broad term. Okay.
It's gonna span from bioavailability, where we have that's something we are increasing magnificently, right? Like when you can take even just the alteration of a different salt, right? Like so say I have a ketamine molecule and I add a different salt to it, and instead of hydrochloride, or instead of for instance, let's say I use Spravato as an example. It has a specific salt attached, right? But then on the street, someone says like, oh, everyone, snorts this up their nose. So let's put, a chlorine salt on there, which makes it more bioavailable through that specific function, right? So this whole scourge of DCK, right, dichloroketamine, which is like pretty significantly available on the market and broadly distributed in the black market. It was a chemist looking to increase and bioavailability because they understood the route of administration was incephalation rather than intramuscular, right? So even just changing the salt attached to a molecule can increase bioavailability specific to the route of administration. But I also mean availability when it comes to who has the time and the energy and the resources to be able to engage in a psychedelic therapy, right? So LSD is a prime example. I think therapeutic use of LSD is incredibly valuable. But when you have a compound that could have a 12-hour time span, and you have to have a therapist or 2 therapists paid for that entire 12 hours, plus the EU GMP or CGMP quality molecule to ensure the supply chain is there, which makes these compounds go from incredibly inexpensive to really incredibly expensive. Like for instance, MDMA, like an 80 milligram tablet of pure CGMP MDMA costs around $380 in bulk.
Wow.
Through a CGMP manufacturer, where you can find it on the black market for $10, $20, right?
I'll call you
I'm
after
talking
the show.
80
I'll call you after the
milligrams,
show.
right? So you can see, right, that there are these limitations and these financial contributions that cause issues, right? So one of the things, like a company like Gilgamesh is doing really successfully with beta-psilocin, was taking psilocybin, which has a really dependable and predictable, efficacious outcomes that are durable and long-lasting, and they're improving patient access by shortening the duration, right?
Hey, Sean, I want to bookmark a future conversation, not the one about something that might have vowels like E and consonants like M and R and C, but let's have a conversation about clinical trials and clinical trials like 3.0 or clinical trials AI enhanced or clinical trials citizen science, right? Because I think to your point about the microdosing and having controlled trials and being able, like, what if we had 2,000 people around the world taking biometric data or self-reporting, however we capture that and get to a place where we can actually have real, you know where I'm going. Okay. So
yeah,
there's that would be an interesting conversation.
So, I agree. Just to speak really briefly to your point as maybe a preview to that conversation, so we have these challenges in our current FDA approved trial system, right?
What?
Functional unblinding for psychedelics is, obviously been identified as a potential problem. I don't see it as being as big a problem as they say.
Sure.
Nobody had a problem with functional unblinding for ketamine. No one had a problem with functional unblinding for lithium. Nobody had, it's crazy to me that it's like, oh, functional unblinding, you could tell if you're on MDMA. Yeah, yes, you could. And you could tell that 86% of the people got better. So if you're going to tell me that's a functional unblinding related issue, I'm sorry. I'm going to push back against that and say that's not scientifically rigorous, right? That's a cultural bias you're bringing to the table. And I will point the finger at certain organizations like Symposia for cultivating a narrative that was based on lies, manipulation.
Oh, George, you're getting near the third rail.
I don't, and I will say, listen to Hamilton, go in and see, the great research that's been done to track the money, because it's always about the money, right? If you've got a group where all of a sudden these scientific advocates are at war with other scientific advocates, you have to question, like, wow, is this, maybe a rich family that has a bone to grind with Rick?
Well, I think,
not to mention the family, right? But
yeah.
like, this is a personality dispute that's derailed one of the most efficacious medicines possible and is creating a situation where our veterans are still suffering and dying every single day. This is a situation where now this medication, MDMA specifically for PTSD, is going to cost exponentially more than it would have cost before, because to date, most of the funds that came to the Lycos were based off of research that was funded through a nonprofit arm of MAPS, right? Which would have enabled Lycos to keep their pricing low. Now they have to put hundreds millions more into more clinical trials on a drug that is the most effective drug that we have for PTSD by milestones, right? Like, it is like, it's criminal. Like, I
Wait. Don't make claims. It may or may not be criminal. We'll see. It depends who's in office and who's sitting on the judge's seat. But
so
I feel
emotionally, from an emotional space,
I'm with you.
I'm saying that this is impacting me to a point where I am now using terms that are not clear and not easily defined or well defined.
Sure.
So thank you for calling me on that, Christian. But
I'm saying it with love and being a little cheeky, because you're
please do. I
emotion and your perspective on it, from my perspective, is on point, right? There's definitely other perspectives, and you've got this whole spectrum. But you brought up the river prior. I'll just say, after spending 2018 to 7+ years in the cannabis and hemp genetics space, seeing everybody run around like a chicken with their head cut off, that, oh my God, it's about the tax code and it's about this and that. And, the cannabis industry, the legal cannabis industry in the United States, and in many areas where it's been happening for a while is kind of a dumpster fire, and we could have a whole nother show about that. And everyone's like, well, it's the dispensaries. No, it's the labs. It's the payola and the CO. It's fucking bullshit. Just look around. Big pharma, big tobacco, big alcohol does not want cannabis to succeed for a CPG or for medical reasons unless they have the biggest piece of it, right? So it's not about whether the plant's efficacious or whether plant medicine should happen or regs or the Republicans or the Dems, like whatever. It's back to the money. Like you can always follow the money and unearth who's pulling the strings if you look close enough and hard enough. And most people don't want to look because they don't want to know that their favorite, beer brand is, cannibalizing cannabis, or that big pharma doesn't want you to get a plant that can actually make you healthy for less than $1,200 a month. Thank you, Medicare.
Yeah.
So,
I have no problem calling truth to power and saying, Constellation Beverages does have a role to play in
distribution
keeping
of
plant medicines from broader adoption, primarily because they found after spending billions of dollars that, hey, you can't mix oil and water. Oh my goodness. Like, doesn't matter how much money you throw at it. Doesn't matter how many MIT scientists you get.
I'm going to have to leave in a
make a
few
beverage.
minutes. I'm going to have to leave in a few minutes. I'll just say, if anybody listening or watching wants to do a little research, there was some publicly funded research, I think it was during the Biden administration, about the implications or cause and effect tying cancer to alcohol. And apparently that report is not going to get released.
Ding, ding, ding.
And, there's, I think, someone in Washington that claims to have never drank alcohol, and he makes a point of that. And there's somebody else in Washington that, is very concerned about toxicity and things in our environment or things that we might be taking that could cause us harm. And they're not talking about alcohol. And I'm not a hypocrite. Like I like my glass of wine, I like my beers, and I might have drank a little too much in college in the military. But when we don't talk about the truth around these substances, regulated or unregulated in this case, right? This is a regulated substance. We can't make informed decisions, right? If we don't have the information as an adult human who wants to make choices about risk and
particularly when we as a U.S. citizens paid for that study and now are having it completely not allowed to see, right?
I think that was a great question from Clint, George.
It is.
Yeah. If you don't mind bringing that one back.
Of course.
And maybe we don't end on his question because it is maybe a downer.
But shout out to the great Clint Kyles. If you guys are new, check out Clint Kyles' podcast. Amazing individual. He says there's currently a boom of interest in psychedelics within modern, developed, and prosperous societies, and appears to have some very promising applications. What do you believe to be the most potentially negative outcomes of this surge of interest in such societies? Are we mature and responsible enough for widespread psychedelic use? Great question, Clint. Thank you for being here.
Hey guys, I'm gonna politely peace out. I left my answer to that question in the chat, so you can share it. And I've got a family member waiting for me. Otherwise, I'd hang with you guys longer. So appreciate.
Thank you so much, Christian. Appreciate it.
Bye, guys.
So Clint, thank you for this question. And I think that so often in psychedelics, we can be preaching to the choir. So often in psychedelics, we can be overly enthusiastic about things and not managing or recognizing the potential for real life harm. And I think that we, in general, in the West, in prosperous and developed nations, are incredibly privileged, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So you asked a couple questions here that I think all bear sensitive and focused responses that I don't know if we have the time or I have the expertise to give, but I can give you my perspectives and my opinions. So I come from a long line of alcoholics, particularly on my father's side. I will be the first male in 5 generations to not die of an alcohol-related disease. So when it comes to compound use and the question of, are Western prosperous societies responsible enough to safely utilize psychedelics, I can say that my answer is I don't think so. We haven't proven that we are safely able to navigate compounds with incredibly lower levels of altered state generation, right? We struggle with tobacco, which is an amazing plant healer when used appropriately, right? But it's all about route of administration. The same coca leaf that you chew is not the same as the cocaine you snort or the crack cocaine that you smoke. So we have a society, I feel, that's really focused on immediate gratification and very commonly falls into traps that manipulate our ego or our self-aggrandization opportunities. And I think psychedelics, they're not ego-destroying compounds in my experience. They stimulate what's there. So great speaker Wayne Dyer says, you know, what happens when you get squeezed, when someone puts the squeeze on you, right? People like to say, oh, I got angry because someone was treating me with, you know, this way. I got upset because, you know, I was being forced, right? These outside impacts, these outside circumstances were shifting. Well, Wayne Dyer's response to that is no. When you get squeezed, you know what happens? What's inside comes out. So if you've got some anger and you get squeezed, guess what's going to come out? That anger, right? If you've got some ego and you get a radical, life-changing experience that happens, well, sometimes that ego is going to get expanded, right? And I think maybe, you know, we might have all been in this industry long enough to meet a shaman bro or a pharma bro or, you know, someone who shows up on the playa in their private jet and has all the greatest RCs available to man, but they're still not a great person, right? I don't know. Those are my experiences. So I think this idea that there's psychedelics are a panacea to all modern, you know, problems, I think is just foolhardy. And that, you know, that comes from drinking the Kool-Aid and feeling like you have to present such an incredible story to change the narrative from being one of demonization to being one of, you know, aggrandization, right? And maybe these compounds don't deserve aggrandization. Maybe they deserve a sober and honest look to see where there is efficacious use possible, where you know, another inspiration of mine, Dr. Bruce Damer, is fond of saying the following. He says, when you work with plant medicine, you have two experiences. First, the healing, then comes the revealing, right? And not to put a hierarchical difference between healing and revealing, because both I think are necessary and essential. But if you don't heal and balance yourself and you venture into the unknown, right, through your consistent use of psychedelic or altered state expanding consciousness protocols, then, you know, I don't necessarily know that that's a good thing, right? It is about set and setting. It is about appropriate cultural use. It is about a certain level of maturity, not just in terms of age, but also in terms of why are we going to these medicines? You know, why are we going to them so often? I believe that altered states in general, right, are incredibly beneficial and valuable to every human being. And I recognize that all over the world, there are practices generated particularly and often through indigenous communities that produce repeatable altered states that have nothing to do with compound use, right? Yeah. Meditation, breath work, walkabouts, sun dances. These are things that, and that's just to name a few, right? We have access to altered states. I mean, that time when you were young and you spun around in a circle or held your breath for a long time, or just like looked up into the sky and saw something that brought awe to your heart, right? Like these are common experiences. They're not handed out just to the few and just to the, those of us that have access to the best drugs. These are humanity's birthright, right? And I do not say that psychedelic compounds are humanity's birthright. What I say is the access to altered states, imagining. I mean, I'm a big fan of reading books. I grew up in a place where we didn't have other media sources, so I was like almost addicted to reading books, right? And I can't think of a more psychedelic experience than being transported to a completely different world by the magic of some sheets of processed trees with magical symbols written on them. All of a sudden, I'm in Narnia. I'm in Dune, right? All of a sudden, I'm transported from being my single individual self to seeing things from another perspective, right? So we're already, as a community, as a culture, commonly accessing altered states. We just don't think of it as a sacred thing. We don't think of it as a expansive thing. And so I would say we need to respect the tools we have and use them and be in right relation with those before we make really fast steps, right? And we need to balance that against the existential crises that we face, right? Because broad adoption of psychedelic compounds could be something that helps ameliorate climate change, could be something that allows us to radically alter the course of our cultural perspective to understand and to live in harmony with ourselves and with nature. These are real. These are real opportunities and real possible futures, right? That we have to sort of like hitch our star to and like draw ourselves forward into that potential future. Because if we don't, we're really facing some challenges, right? Look at the world around us. We have politically motivated assassinations in our own country. We haven't had that for a long time, right? We have wars being fought all over the world. We have strikes against sovereign nations happening with with impunity, right? It doesn't seem to be a very it seems to be a landscape that's changing and evolving quickly, right? It seems to be a landscape where these existential threats and these wicked problems become either overwhelming, or they are the impetus that push us to an evolutionary trajectory that's inclusive and beautiful and powerful, right? And so it's really those two concerns, right? Are we mature enough? Are we going to mature fast enough to survive, right? And these compounds could be part of that, or they could be the reason we don't, right? And it's up to us as individuals to shepherd and to tell better stories, because that's what moves culture. Culture isn't affected and changed by the latest clinical data, right? Culture isn't affected and moved by one guy at the top making a selection and a choice and saying, we're going that way, right? That's not how it actually works. How it works is that each of us individually have agency and choice, and we get to decide what we put our time, our energy, and our money into. So think about it, right? Think about what you're putting your time and energy and money into. Think about how often you're curious versus how often you're bored, right? I think boredom sometimes can be a powerful thing, because it then will all of a sudden push you into finding a route to access your own imagination, because none of us have ever been bored growing up without an iPhone, None of us who are my age or your age ever were bored playing with ourselves, right? So, yeah, that's the balance. That's the tightrope we're walking, Can we mature fast enough to be good stewards? Can we mature fast enough to be in right relations with these strong and powerful psychedelic substances that we could culturally inhabit a broader and more enriched tapestry? Or are we going to, throw up our hands and say, it's too much. We're all going to die. Why? Well, let's just have a good time on the way, as it burns, I don't know, man. I don't have that, but I know that places like this, we can start telling stories that have potentially greater outcomes, and we can acknowledge there is a dark side, right? We can acknowledge there is a shadow work that needs to be done in our culture, inside ourselves individually, and honesty is the path forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
And George, can you ask a question too? I mean,
yeah,
your podcast, and I've been talking so much, and
it's awesome.
I want to thank you for the vehicle. I want to thank you for the passion and the excitement. It's infectious, and when that can be shared broadly, I think, like I've said, we can tell better stories, and we can ask better questions, which prompts the telling of better stories. So thank you for being part of this process.
Man, I'm so stoked to be here and just to learn. I feel like an eternal student. I get to do this all the time. For me, I guess one of the questions that comes to mind for me is that maybe there are no answers. There's just better questions, like you said, and whether through sci-fi. But it seems to me, the older I get, the more I realize I don't know anything. But I do have better questions. And I think it is that broadening of questions that allows you to be a responsible user of whatever altered state you're doing, whether it's imagination, whether it's boredom, whether it's psychedelics. And I just go down these rabbit holes sometimes, Sean, of like, maybe what we're seeing is the devastation of a system desperately trying to cling on to power. And all these people coming up. And I go back to the individual. Like the individual is where the change is going to be. And if I use like mycelium as sort of the way forward, it's always in the underground. It spends all of its time in the underground, and only when the time is right does a mushroom come up, and then people start putting their shops up and selling access to it. You know what I mean? Like, so for me, like, and maybe this is doom for everybody, but like, I don't see it. Like, I just don't see the centralization. I just don't see the moneyed families or the big interest allowing this thing to happen. But that's where the beauty is. Like I said before, it's each individual understanding that they are the light. They are the ones that are going to move it forward. The system is not there to help you. The system is there to like placate you. But once you take psychedelics, or maybe you go through breath work, but once you go through these altered states, you realize how powerful you are. And that makes me think that we are responsible enough. And it may take some time to get around those areas, but guess what? You spend enough time in those environments and watch how beautiful you begin to see yourself. Like, that is the answer. And each one of us becomes the catalyst for change. And that's a wave that no one can stop. What are your thoughts?
Hey, I can't wait.
It's here.
Because when I say we're not mature enough, man, I'm talking about right now, today. The average American, the average Westerner probably needs a little work, right? Probably needs a little reminder. Probably get off their phone.
Of course.
Probably needs to get out in nature a little bit more.
Yes.
And what's one of the things I think microdosing is really good at is building a platform for people to then have these deeper realizations and experiences, and inside of a safe and in a trajectory of positivity and love, right?
Yeah.
And the truth is, millions of people every year take MDMA. The truth is, millions of people every year reach altered states through the opportunities presented them through pharmacology. So that's not going to stop, right? And that's the in some ways that stream diverging, right? And so it's not, like I said, it's bringing something new to the table, not obliterating the old. The old will die off eventually, right? That other path, when it doesn't have enough water, it's it dries up. Natural, right? It's organic. it's just this thing, like when I caution people to have patience, right, with themselves, with our culture, with our communities, with science, right? Because we're all catching up. We're all a work in progress. And so if we expect tomorrow the world's going to be a better place because 2 more people did mushrooms, then I'm sorry, you're probably going to be, a little bit disappointed, right?
Yes.
But if your idea is tomorrow the 2 right people did mushrooms to start a conversation about how more people have access to truth and justice and agency, then you're probably going to be pretty excited about the future, right? And I think people like yourself, people like myself, we're working on ways to create incubation centers, to create mycelial networks, to create the infrastructure which girds this new reality, right? Because there was a administrative class involved in the mysteries. They were there. They had a job. They understood what their role was to support the greater unfolding of their culture, right? And it's time for some more people to step up and recognize that about ourselves and say, you know what, my job is for the continued flourishing of this culture, for the continued flourishing of us as a society and humanity in general, because I think humans are a bridge, not a destination. And I think the tools we use along this journey are going to predicate the direction we head, and have always been part of our lives since the beginning of dawn of humanity. Whether you want to listen to the stoned ape theory or not, psychedelic altered states have been a crucial component for consciousness development. And we can see this directly in the difference between the Iliad and the Odyssey. If you look at Julian Jaynes' Origin of
beautiful book.
The Bicameral Mind, it's a really heady book with an incredibly long title, but just read the prologue. That is a pretty good place to start. Read some philosophy, listen to an indigenous elder speak about truth and reciprocity, listen to their right relations with all the other beings of Earth, and then try to integrate that, right, into your own lived experience. How does that ring true, and how can that then be expressed through self to reach the other? Because I believe it's all about, like you said earlier, George, it's all about, like, the work is done inside. The work is done underground. Michael Mead is talking about, like, all of the action occurs in the mystery, in the darkness. It's just the explosion into the seen world that's all we can experience. But so we get twisted, right? We forget that it's incubated in this empty space, in this unknowable space, in this archetypal space, and that as shamans or indigenous healers, or as modern psychonauts, part of our shared responsibility is to navigate the unknown, and then to come back and tell beautiful stories about that. Beautiful stories that are honest, right? So that's what I try to do. And I try to create safe spaces for people to do that. And for that to be a way that we can show up in the world, and a way that we can show up, because having a safe legal space to have these experiences is crucial, because that was the difference in cannabis between like, it's a hands off, I can't talk about this drug, but everyone smokes it, to I'm a lawyer and I stepped up and said, hey, guess what? I'm a better person, and I handle my ADHD utilizing, psilocybin, utilizing cannabis.
Right.
I'm a judge. I'm a doctor. Once that seed change happened, where people could be a little bit more honest about their personal experiences, the conversation could exit that people smoking are stoners and everyone's dumb, because the only one who admits that they're smoking is somebody who's in a not particularly high place in our society.
Right.
But as soon as people started being honest, right, we could say, oh, wow, And the thing is about psychedelics is it's already happened. We're just not looking, right? Like, the birth of the double helix, process very likely happened when Watson and Crick had an LSD experience, right?
Yeah.
Or like Fadiman and Hardiman in their 1967 trial on mescaline and LSD's capacity to improve human creative problem solving resulted in the mouse, right? We wouldn't have had the mouse. We wouldn't have had a graphic interface that allows us to do something other than type unless someone visionary came up with it, right? You know, and we all know the stories about, you know, Apple. Right? We all know the stories about like Silicon Valley's adoption of these compounds because they make us smarter. Why? If those weren't real, then why are they there, right? So we need to start looking at these cases. We need to start being more honest and open where we are safe enough to do so, right? That's one of the reasons I love
Yes.
I mean, and I will speak openly. I have the privilege of being a white American man where I can openly say I have used psychedelic compounds in my life and they have brought me great benefit. I am a professional who wears a suit and goes to work and lives in society and has a son who goes to college. I'm a part of this, you know, tapestry. And I can stand up and say, I have enough privilege to risk the standing up and saying, I use psychedelic compounds. I love them. I've never had a teacher that was as powerful and as amazing as some of these compounds. Right?
Yeah. Without a doubt.
That's where I see, you know, this next stage of evolution coming, right? It's in the unmasking, it's in the revealing, it's in the bringing forward of the mystery, right? And for everything that I've said that is inaccurate, for everything I've said that's, you know, misguided, you know, like I'm still learning. And please, you know, like whoever's listening or listens to this, if I've said something wrong, reach out to me and tell me. Be like, no, you know what? You were saying 5-HTB. It's actually, you know, like really, we've got to be held accountable, and I and myself included, right? As a culture, as a society, as individuals. So call me to task, right? That's how, you know,
of course,
iron sharpens iron, and we will only be stronger with mutually beneficial criticisms, right? And that's delineated from personal attacks, because if we continue to fight amongst ourselves, if we continue to say, you know, big pharma is this and Gilgamesh is wrong and Lycos I don't like, you know, Antonio Gracias, you know, and so I'm gonna shame Lycos, you know. Well, David Holmes is a pretty good guy too. McDonald's a pretty good guy, so like, yeah, oh, you've got one questionable guy, and yeah, he owns 51% of the company, and yes, FDA, it's fucking your fault, and yes, Symposia, it's fucking your fault, and yes, that's it, right? Hold some accountability. Be honest and say, like, well, nobody's threatening you, Nishay. You know, like, nobody's up there. You're a cool person. You know, like, what's wrong? Please come back. Like, we miss you. You're awesome. You're so fucking smart. Come back to us. Please start telling the truth. Please stop taking money from people who are dirtbags with agendas. You know, there's other money out there. Help create it, right?
Yeah.
That's the next. And if I could say one final point, I'm really excited for the future where the psychedelic industry includes some people other than privileged people who can afford to do this as our hobbies. And it's sad. There needs to be a space where people, that's what's missing in the pharma rollout of these compounds, is a place where for the average person to have a financial remuneration from being part of this community.
Yep.
And if this community continues to just be privileged, white, Western, then that stamp is gonna be stuck, and it's gonna impact the future development of this culture in a way. So we have to, as a culture, as an industry, provide and create methodologies for people to be able to join and be part of this, and not lose their jobs and have jobs in the industry. And until we do that, then it's just kind of like preaching to the choir, right? It's just going to MAPS in Denver, where if you can afford to spend $3,000, sure, come and join the conversation.
Yeah.
And no disrespect towards MAPS, no disrespect towards Simeon or to Rick or any of the other people who organized this last year of MAPS. I know you've lost money on psychedelic science every year, and I know why you did the things you did. And thank you for giving out so many scholarships. You guys are awesome, you know? And so I hold it as my responsibility. I hold it as my responsibility to talk about this and say, we got to bring more people in. We got to make it a place where more people can afford to be part of this conversation. So I love it.
Me too.
That's what I want to do.
Yeah, I think we're doing it. I think we're doing it here. And Sean, I'm absolutely grateful to get to know you a little bit more and to see what you're doing. And I can't wait for a few weeks when we may or may not have another show coming up over here. Like, let's say people are listening to this right now and they're like, I want to reach out to Sean. How do I get a hold of this guy? Where can people find you? What do you got coming up? What are you excited about?
Okay. I have socials, but I'm never on them. They're not healthy for me, man. Like, I'll be honest, really. Like when I go, I have a couple, Instagram page for EMRC Lesotho, right? You can find me there. But I haven't checked in like a year. Like, I'm sorry, so email. I'm old. I'm 46. I was born in 79. I'm a little bit old school, old fashioned, so you can find me at my name, Sean Scarritt, SEANSCARRITT @gmail.com. I'm old. I got my own name, and you can also find me on my work email, which is Sean, SEAN, at EMRC Lesotho, LESOTHO.com. Reach out to me. I'd love to be part of the conversation. And in terms of things I'm doing, man, I'm keeping my head to the grindstone and envisioning an amazing psychedelic future where all of you can be involved in some legal and safe events and can come do some next generation psychedelic compounds that have been proved for optimum human capacity, and to join me in Southern Africa. Because I think that having a space in the global South, having a small jurisdictional space where we can be the first of many dominoes, and we can join people like, Michael Brotherton, he's got a project in the Bahamas working on similar things, right? So, we're part of a chorus, right? Christian mentioned, some countries in South America. I'll mention Uruguay. I want to give them a shout out because they have a law in the Senate right now that's to legalize all plant medicine-based psychedelics, and included on that list is MDMA. So I think that's incredibly forward-thinking, and I love this breaking down the barriers between synthetics and natural-based compounds, because it's actually nothing is a synthetic, right? Every single synthetic compound we use is based off of an aromatic indole or amide chain, right? So like LSD, that comes from ergot, my friends. That's a natural mold, so what's not natural about LSD? MDMA comes from the sassafras oil, right? What's not natural about that? Because we've altered it slightly to have optimal pharmacological impact? No, sorry, man. This is that conversation that we take ourselves as humans outside of the natural world. It's silly. If I made it, I'm natural. So guess what that is? That's natural. And so any delineation outside of that, it's just this hierarchical thinking, this distancing ourselves from truth.
Yep.
And so I don't buy it. We're all part of a web of love and beauty and connectivity, and that connectivity includes things we're not particularly in love with, like fentanyl. That's part of our lives, part of our cultures. If we don't look at the negative and the positive, then we're hopeless romantics.
Yeah.
And there's a beautiful place for hopeless romantics if you're an artist. but if you're a cultural leader, man, that can lead to some bad outcomes. We've seen those, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. You can't have the in an evolution of awareness, you're treated to both the depths of despair and the heights of ecstasy. right? Like you don't get one without the other. And
Yes.
the depths of despair are tough, man. That's that dark area where you really got to look for that inner light to guide your way. But yeah, it's all part of that web, like you said. That was beautifully described.
The Khalil Gibran might say something to the effect, the self-same well that holds your joy was dug with your tears.
Mm.
Right. So there's this, we have this thing in empirical Western culture, the separation of opposites, right? Light
Right.
and dark, diametrically opposed into things that like cancel each other out, like antimatter and matter. They destroy each other. Like, man, come on.
Right.
There's an enlightened perspective that's a little bit more broad than that, I think. And so, even if you use the Hegelian systemology of saying like, we have this thesis, then we have an antithesis. It's diametrically opposed opposite. And then we have the combination of two, which is synthesis.
Yeah.
Right? So we can't forget that synthesis component. And we can't forget the other. And even especially the other that we don't like.
Yeah, of course. That's the one you should look at most, right?
Yeah.
Can you hang on briefly? I got to check something real fast. Are you okay for a second?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
No, thank you. Go ahead, Gordon.
Okay, I'll be right back. 1 second.
Since I abhor a dead mic, I have a communications background. I'll share a poem with you guys. I'm a big lover of Persian poetry, ecstatic poetry, and I love this one. So this is often attributed to Rumi, but I believe it's initially written by Hafez. And it says,
Right here a little bit.
"These words are just a front. What I really want is to chain you to my body and sing for days and days and days about God."
Thank you for carrying that right there. I gotta have to go back and watch that. I had one quick little thing I had to run over there, but I love it, Sean. And I have like a million more questions, but I'm running up.
We do have an opportunity for the next.
Okay. Yes.
Would you mind maybe
Yeah.
closing that with one?
I would. Yeah. Is that okay?
Close us out.
Okay. So let me look through. I got a few in here. Then I have a few on my mind. Let's go with, do you think psychedelics will help us evolve into a species that collaborates better, not just with each other, but with the planet itself?
Undeniably. No question. It's
right.
Like, we have categorical scientific evidence that shows that psychedelics are often considered some of the top 5 most meaningful experiences of your entire life. And this comes from, the Hopkins studies and the look at ecstatic and awe, and which I just love. People often forget, they say, oh, well, we've gotten so far along in this, and in the science, we've forgotten everything that's real about psychedelics. And I say, au contraire, my friend. The psychedelic renaissance was rebooted in a large part specifically to study the ontological experience of awe and the ability for psychedelics to engender a spiritual state, right?
Yeah.
So we're all here at the, all of the scientists in the space are all owe a great debt of gratitude. So it's also been empirically proven that psychedelics, psilocybin specifically, have been shown to improve the connections and affiliations with nature, right?
Yeah.
For us to have a deeper and more personal relationship with nature, right? And so these things can oftentimes come with, non-scientific thinking, and that's part and parcel of the package. So, man, when you combine those, a spiritual sense of awe, a deep and lasting, durable relationship with nature, it starts to sound like we're on the road to interacting with the world in a way that we currently couldn't even perceive of or understand. And I'll give you an example about historical legacy and cultural prejudice and bias, right? So my son, who's now in his second year at college, when he was in high school, he was doing this report on Black studies and African American studies, and the bad guy for him was Du Bois, right? And he said, oh, well, Du Bois was, like judging Africans by a Western standard and saying you have to be excellent, more excellent than a white person in order to make them judge you as simply human, right? And so with our modern perspective, we were looking at that as horrible, And I said, well, maybe you need to go dig a little deeper. He's like, well, I'll use Thomas Jefferson. And he had slaves. And I was like, yes, he absolutely did. And that is abhorrent based off of our modern understanding of right and wrong. However, at the time, he was at the cutting edge of moral decency. And so we have to sort of have this cultural relativism, moral historical relativism, to understand that, no matter how environmentally sensitive we may be, or how environmentally sensitive we may act, how much of an advocate we are, right? It's entirely possible that Greta Thunberg will be considered a planet destroyer in the future because she did the unthinkable. She rode in an airplane. Oh my God, how could you do that? No one in our current society 100 years from now could ever imagine flying in an airplane because it's so horribly destructive to the environment. Well, we can't judge ourselves or the past by our current truth, just like we will not ask to be judged by the future in that way, right? So I hope that my son and his compatriots and my grandchildren and any future, and my son, by the way, is not my biological son. He's the son of my heart and the son of my brain, not the son of my loins, right? He's been in my life for 14 years, but he's 19, right? So I was the bonus dad, and I'm so lucky, right? So we just broaden. We broaden that scope of openness. Who's in my family? A little broader, right? Who's a member of my, my core group of people I respect and trust? If we can make that a little broader, right? And altered states and psychedelics can very often engender those realities that allow us to think more broadly and to understand ourselves as something more than the product of our culture and society. So I'm so excited about the future, man. I'm terrified because I look at the world around me, right? And I say, no point since the World War II have we been closer to, global conflagration, right? But at the same time, we've never had tools as powerful as the ones we have access to now. We've never had a cultural landscape, as open for change as we have now. And yes, this is incredibly divisive, but we're all talking about it. Yeah. Nobody likes the fact that they can't talk to their cousins anymore, that they can't have a conversation with their uncle at Thanksgiving without yelling. Nobody likes it, man. And it doesn't matter whether you identify as a liberal, as a conservative, we have common shared human decency. And it's really important to start remembering that and start resisting the narratives that say, oh, those Democrats are pedophiles. Oh, I can never trust them because they're in Pizzagate. Oh, those Republicans, they're all on the Epstein list, right? Because the fastest way to stop caring or loving about your fellow citizen is to think they're a pedophile, to think they're a terrorist, right? So as soon as you start labeling people, it's really easy to dehumanize. Yes. And so while I am terrified of that, I am really impressed that as a society, I recognize none of my conservative friends like this. None of my liberal friends like this. We all want this to change. So please start talking to your uncle. Start telling him you love him and say, hey, guess what? It seems like psychedelics is the only thing we have in common now. I mean, RFK, we can't talk about vaccines, but we can talk about psychedelics, right? We can't talk about Black Lives Matter, but we can talk about ibogaine therapy. So, oh my God, how beautiful is that crack How amazing is that? Like, is that Moses parting the Red Seas for us? I don't know, but it kind of feels like it is, right?
Yeah.
And I'm inspired to see, okay, if the Republicans have adopted psychedelics to the level they've adopted it, maybe not the psychedelics I want to see, maybe not the way that I want to see them engaged in, right?
Yeah.
But what is the Democratic response going to be? Because there has to be one. Democrats can't be sitting over there in the Newsom camp saying, oh, well, we just have to veto any psychedelic legislation that comes in our state. Because you know what? Y'all are going to be outcasts.
Yep.
Newsom, I got news for you, baby. You're not going to be president. I'm sorry. And no pandering to the center is gonna create a pathway forward for you. The cat's out of the bag. Psychedelics are in the mainstream. Now let's tell better stories about them. Now let's unite with people that don't look and sound like us to tell better stories. Now let's open our hearts and be honest, right? Let's let's realize that like the people running these psychedelic drug design and drug development companies that are selling out to big pharma, they're my friends. There's some really decent and awesome people. They've got good, heart-centered interests, by and large, right? I don't know everybody. I don't know everybody. But from the people I do know, man, they're good people. They're trying to help. And so maybe don't, cast shade on, everyone, right? Maybe work together inside to make a big tent, because right now we've got a bunch of different little yurts. The yurt over there for, decrim. The yurt over there for scientific drug design and development. The yurt over there, for white privileged Westerners, And, I do think it's crucial and essential and absolutely necessary for us to include everyone. I've called out symposia a number of times. But I also said, hey, Shay, I love you. Come on back, babe. Like, you're cool. You're so smart. I've got time for you. And Rick Doblin's the first one to say that. The reason I can forgive her is because he already did. He never hated her. I don't know, but he's and you want to say he's a cult leader. You want to say he's this, he's that. He's an imperfect human, just like the rest of us. But I've never met someone so willing to give you an extra, chance. I've never met anyone so willing to turn the cheek. Man, Rick Doblin's a saint. That might be his problem. He's too nice. He's too giving and too loving and too forgiving. You can forgive, but you don't have to forget. Right? So come together, love each other. I get so passionate, and I'll leave with this, right? Very often, we have this dislike of people being citizen scientists, dislike of people being amateurs, right? Well, the word amateur comes from the root word amor, just to love.
Yeah.
Right? So you know what an amateur means? Someone whose learning is based off of love. That's what an amateur means. So I'm an amateur every. I embrace that. And guess what? All of this, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a chemist. I try to stay in rooms where people who are smarter than me so I can learn something, right? And I just, I listen to people who I trust, who have a deep understanding of these things. And then I do my best to tell stories that include that information, right? Because at the root of things, I'm a storyteller. At the root of things, I hope one day to be a visionary, which is, I think, a storyteller that has cultural impact. That's the difference, right?
Yeah.
A visionary is somebody whose stories actually did something. A storyteller is somebody who sits around a campfire and talks to his friends.
Right.
So I'd love one day to be a visionary,
I'm putting you in that camp already, man. I'm grateful for your time and thank you for hanging out with us. And this is just, we didn't even get into the ideas that science fiction may be remembering the future and all these other things over there. So we're coming back.
That's one, baby.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
This isn't sci-fi, right?
Right.
We have actual clinical data that's showing our neurons are responding before the stimuli.
I know. I want to dig in.
How is that possible? If we're not, we've looked, and when we look cognitive science and what our brains have learned about neuropharmacology, right? Or even neuropsychiatric pharmacology or psychiatric neuropharmacology, right? Or psychedelic neuroscience, right? These things are amazing. But one of the things we're learning from the confluence of all of these is that our brains are predictive machines. We used to think the senses gave us information and then our brain decided. No, my friends. Our brain is deciding, and then it's vetoing certain decisions based off our senses. That's it. So what does a psychedelic do? It disrupts our default mode, right? It disrupts that top-down predictive model, and it potentially takes us into a quantum space because our brains are made of quantum material. Like, this is, again, not science fiction, science fact. The quantum tubes in our brains potentially are what allow us to our brains aren't making consciousness. Very probably our brains are tuning into the frequency of consciousness more like a radio tower, and then allowing consciousness to then engage and enliven, right?
Yeah.
And
we're
this
gonna get
isn't
in
like this, and so this isn't hermetic philosophy. This isn't spiritualism or pseudoscience anymore. This is the amazing thing. This is the amazing thing about science, right? Like Albert Einstein, guess what? Well, he researched a lot. He came from a deep tradition of Sephardic knowledge, right? Deep tradition of underground knowledge. And so when you start talking about like traveling the speed of light, these are thought experiments that are thousands of years old, right? He didn't come up with these. He just brought them into scientific awareness, the same way that like our ideas of consciousness are now coming from the fringe to like, oh, wow, well, the science is pointing towards something different, something predictive, something complex and unique, right? And we know that it's a story when it's simple. Right. Well, DNA is a double helix, my friend. They wind around each other, and that's the whole story. There are only 4 choices. Just the combination of those 4 choices. If you're reducing something to a map, to a protocol, to right. It's reductionist inherently, right? Language itself is reductionist. When I learn the word tree, I stop looking at that thing behind me for all its unique individual beauty. So that right there, that's a plant. Do I need to even learn more? Do I say, oh, it's of a specific species of scarlet begonia, and it came through the farm and through Sasha Shulgin and Ann Shulgin and Tim Scully? Do I know the story of this plant? Do I want to look at it intimately in detail and know it as an individual? Or do I want to say, language, that's a tree? Because I have to use a lot less mental architecture, a lot less mental space with language than I do with pre-language, Man, there's so much to go into with the science of that, with precognition, right? That's fun, right? That's the fun.
I know. I love it. We're gonna get into it.
Looks like we've got all sorts of upcoming dates.
Yes.
Based off of your own weird proclivities, we'll have a buffet of options available.
That's it,
my friends.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Everybody that joined in the chat out there. Polar Nights, I missed you over there. I'll reach out to you personally. Thank you so much for being here. Everybody, thank you so much. Sean, absolutely amazing. The first of many. Everybody go down to the show notes. Check out Sean. Reach out to him. I hope everyone's having a beautiful day. And that's all we got. Hang on briefly afterwards, Sean. Everybody else within the sound of my voice, we love you. Aloha.